Accidental Marriage by Shadina. Chapter 13. It was so good to finally be home. How we missed it. The musky smell all old houses have was comforting. To hear the familiar old creaks that he had grown so used to, he hardly heard anymore. It was like seeing an old friend, where nothing had changed and yet somehow everything had. It was familiar, and yet for some reason unfamiliar, all at the same time. Maybe it was the change in personal perspective caused by a traumatic and near-death experience, or it could be because this was his first time entering his house in a wheelchair. Ed had transmuted the stairs into a slop so they could get him in, since his knee still wasn't healed and wouldn't be so for a long time coming, and he couldn't use crutches because of his busted shoulder. Roy had slept through most of the train ride back to Central and at the hospital as well. It was his method of escaping the pain to simply sleep through it. It worked rather well for him for the most part. Ed had probably been bored, though. "I got you set up in one of your guest rooms downstairs. Don't you ever dust this place?" Ed asked, making a face. Rory rolled his eyes.
"Yes, dusting. It would take me an entire day to do so. Honestly, I have other things I'd rather be doing than dust rooms no one will use."
Riza suddenly stepped on the seat. "Don't think just because you won't be coming to work, that work won't be coming to you, sir," Riza said to smash any fantasies of anything happening contradictory.
"Thank you, Lieutenant. You're, as always, very capable,"
he said, not able to hide his sarcasm from the sentence, not that Riza was expecting anything less. "Of course, sir," she said, feeling slightly amused. Sometimes she had to admit she got a bit of joy making Roy do paperwork, knowing how much he detested it. "How about I make dinner?" she offered, but didn't wait to hear the responses before heading for the kitchen. Roy made a face. Riza wasn't a very good cook. She didn't know how to season things. Roy grew up with a Jing mother who used lots of spices, so Riza's lack of spices was very offsetting for Roy's taste buds. Ed gave him a strange look. "Something wrong?" he asked him. Roy just shook his head. The boy would see when he tried some of Hawkeye's bland cooking.
"Do you like chess?"
he asked Ed. Ed blinked, surprised by the invitation. "I've never understood the game."
"Then allow me to teach you. Take me to the living room and then go fetch the chessboard from my room. The one in the library is in the middle of a game between Grumman and myself," he explained. "My room is on the 3rd floor, second door on the right," he instructed. Ed seemed to understand and went to do as he was told. He got up to the 3rd floor and wondered why the man had his room up here. Didn't make any sense to him. There were perfectly good rooms on lower levels. He went to the second door on his right and opened it up. First thing he noticed were the thick books on the floor. He got a mental image of Roy sitting on the floor, much like he would, going through the books as he researched something. He smiled a bit at the image in his head. There was a full-size bed against the far wall. It almost felt like the bed was an afterthought in the room. The bed wasn't made up, so the blue bedspread was bundled at the foot of the bed, revealing the white sheets. A rather large desk, paper strewn on top of it, with a lamp, was near the bed. Along the rest of the wall there were several bookshelves. These books seemed far more advanced than the ones in his room. Roy was certainly a bookworm. It was amusing. Normally a man like Mustang wouldn't be a bookworm. That would be more expected out of people who looked more like Shezka, though she was certainly extreme in that respect. The chessboard he spoke of was in the middle of the available floor space on a nightstand with one chair by it. Apparently Roy was never planning on having a rival on the other side of this board, though it appeared to be in the middle of a game. He piled all the pieces into the middle of the board and lifted up the sides to carry it downstairs. If Roy expected him to keep the pieces in the same place, well, he could just go screw himself. He put the chessboard on the coffee table in the living room, where Roy was, and went to get one of the pieces that rolled off the table. "There you go, bastard," he said, but with no real malice even behind the name. Roy began to instruct Ed on how to play, and once again Ed demonstrated on just how sharp his mind really was. Sometimes Ed simply amazed him. Ed's gold eyes flickered up and locked stares with Roy. "What?" Roy quickly looked away. "Nothing,"
he muttered. Ed wasn't buying it, though. He had a lot of time to think since the incident with the crazy guy. Roy had reacted to him in the alley. He had reacted to him when he was drunk, and when he came down in the kimono. He had not missed that blush. He didn't get to think any further as Riza came and told them that dinner was ready. They went and sat down. They had simply moved a chair for Roy. The food looked really good in Ed's opinion. He didn't know what Roy was complaining about earlier. There was chicken covered in gravy, steamed green beans, and some bread on the side with butter. He scooped some onto his plate and quickly took a bite, and it was as good as it looked, and he quickly went to inhale what was on his plate. Roy thanked Riza for the meal, but he didn't like it. The only saving grace was the gravy and lots of salt and pepper. The chicken had no flavor, nor did the beans. He saw Ed eating it, obviously liking, and mentally shook his head. It was times like these when he really did feel different from everyone else, felt like he was a different race. He supposed he was, being half Jing. He just didn't understand how people could eat things without adding flavor to it. After the meal was done, dishes were taken care of, and coffee was shared, Riza opted to go home and take care of her dog. Ed was going to stay here and take care of Roy. Al was in Rosenbull. Ed wasn't one to dance around subjects, and he wasn't about to do that now, either. Roy was now looking at the chessboard as if trying to find the best tactic. Ed supposed he'd never be as good as Roy with chess, just like in the office. Roy planned things further in advance, pulling strings where needed, whereas Ed made things up as he went along. It was one of those things that irritated him about Colonel Roy Mustang. How could the man possibly figure out Ed's actions and plan accordingly for them, if not even Ed knew what he was going to do? It was almost creepy. Scratch that. It was creepy. If that was the case, though, did that mean that the bastard knew?
Ed, it's your turn.
Ed's attention was jerked back into present, and his gold eyes met with Ingy Blackwood's. "Why did you kiss me?" he asked bluntly. He felt a certain satisfaction seeing the colonel thrown off and trying to figure out how to respond. He opened his mouth and closed his mouth twice already, but it seemed third time was the charm.
"Isn't that what you wanted? We were on a mission,"
he said simply. "Bullshit," Ed said, calling him on it. He wasn't going to allow the colonel to use rhetoric to get out of this one. "You didn't have to kiss me like you did, if that was the reason. There was something there, bastard." Roy frowned. He absolutely hated having something he said called on.
"You were imagining things."
"Or maybe you're in denial," Ed countered. Ed had gone through the same thing. When he had realized that he knew what the colonel's ass felt like, he had gone through a fit of denial. Now he's learned to accept it, embrace it in a way. He couldn't change how he felt, and if the colonel felt the same way, even close to it, then damn it, Edward wasn't going to let him get away with talking himself out of it. He wanted to know what this was like. He wanted to experience this, what it felt like when two people had feelings for each other, and the bastard wasn't going to keep him from this.
"I'm serious, Full Metal. It was for the mission, and nothing."
He was cut off when Ed slammed his hands onto the chessboard, knocking over the white and black pieces and leaning over to kiss the raven-haired man, silencing him effectively. Not like the guy could get away from him anyway. He knew that he had been right, though, when Roy started kissing him back. Ed may not be the most eloquent of the male species, perhaps one of the furthest from it, but he had a certain nobleness to him. The blonde had a steadfast character. He would stand by your side through thick and thin. He demonstrated this throughout, and even Roy. Ed had cared for Roy on the train ride and in the hospital, when he couldn't even move because the doctors would let him. He found he had to rely heavily on Ed, and Ed didn't seem at all hindered by it, nor was his teasing too much that it crossed the line. It had taken a lot of the stress off of Roy because he felt like he could trust Ed. Because of now, Ed had kept an even head through this entire thing. There was certainly a new level of respect for him, but this? He felt thin lips against his own, and the other man's blonde bangs against his cheek. Ed was not a child. No child would have been able to demonstrate the kind of leadership and level-headedness he demonstrated back there. Edward Ulrich was no child. He was a soldier, even if he didn't like it. He possessed the characteristics the military works on instilling into their cadets. While he may be insubordinate at times, he got the job done, no matter the odds against him. That took courage and a good head. The lips were suddenly gone, and he opened his eyes, not realizing he had even shut them, and looked up into Ed's smirking face and scowled.
"Did I say you could stop?"
he demanded.